even among people who think really highly of their own intelligence, Ted Cruz stands out. And his attempts to be human just are so bad. He released a family video for his campaign in which they did little interviews with his children and his parents and his wife. And then the campaign also released outtakes of it because they thought that would be humanizing. And the outtakes were just horrifying. Yeah. Like watching his own kids not want to interact with him. It was just kind of terrifying. Cruz most recently made news, of course. So Ted Cruz claims to be a huge Simpsons superfan. One of the other videos that we released but in an interview recently, Cruz was asked about The Simpsons, and he basically, I'm paraphrasing here, basically said, well, you know, Lisa Simpson, the Democrats are the party of Lisa Simpson. We're the party of Homer and Marge and Bart. Okay. So, you guys have watched The Simpsons before, right?
Yeah.
Who is the smart person in that family? Yes, that's that whole character. She is the smart one with all the good ideas. It's weird to say that you don't want to be the party of the smart person. Cruz actually did a follow-up interview in which he doubled down on this, and he said, no, we are definitely the party of Homer Simpson, because Homer Simpson is an everyday guy who works hard and cares about his family. And you guys know the problem with that, right?
Yeah.
No, Homer Simpson is a lazy jerk. That's that character. That's the joke. I'm sorry? Yeah. Don't be Homer. That's like one of the messages of The Simpsons is don't be this guy. And yeah, I don't know what's wrong with Ted Cruz. I really don't. Rand Paul. Okay, so how does Rand Paul get his start in politics?
Ron Paul?
Yes, he is the son of Ron Paul, a somewhat famous libertarian-esque conservative from Texas. Rand is sort of kind of piggybacking on that brand a little bit. He's not his dad, though, in that his dad really was crazy. Whereas I don't think Rand Paul is. He's much more of a conventional Republican. Not a terribly impressive person. Has some slightly unconventional views when it comes to security, but otherwise looks like every other Republican when it comes to social and economic issues. He also wants to go back on the gold standard, which I think I've explained in this class is the worst possible idea that you can come up with for monetary policy. So he was always a bit of a fringe character. He also had the problem that he was up for re-election in 2016, so he was simultaneously running for president while also running for Senate, and did actually have to get the Kentucky Republican Party to change the rules and let him do that in case he didn't win the Republican nomination, which he didn't, so, you know, good for Rand, he's still employed. He most recently made the news, the national news, when his neighbor attacked him from behind and beat him up and broke a few of his ribs. It was not a political thing, it was not a political act or anything, he was just really mad at the way that Rand Paul mows his lawn and maintains the bushes. Someday you will grow up, and if you are terribly unfortunate, you will buy a home that will have a homeowners association attached to it, and you will have to deal with this kind of crap. Oh God. And then there's Rubio. We got to talk about Marco Rubio here for a second. You know how there are some sports teams or some people who just look really good on paper, work all in life? That's Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio is the guy that you would look at on paper and think, oh yeah, totally, they should nominate him, he's going to win, he'd be great. You know, he's relatively young, he's relatively good looking, as politicians go. He's a reasonably charismatic speaker as long as he has a script in front of him. Great.
got great conservative credentials, you know, strongly pro-life, anti-gay, all that good stuff. Rubio has been given multiple chances since becoming a senator to really become the leading voice in the Republican Party. And what's notable is that every time he's been given this opportunity to really step forward and shine, he's failed miserably. Just every single time. And at a certain point, you gotta pat the guy on the head and go, no, it's just not gonna happen, man. Rubio's campaign was famously disorganized, and by that I mean it mostly just lacked an organization. His New Hampshire office, for example, didn't even have its own internet service. They kept stealing Wi-Fi from the Starbucks next door, which the Starbucks eventually started really complaining about. It's just not a good sign for your campaign. Any chance that Rubio had of being president pretty much ended with the Republican debate that occurred right before the New Hampshire primary. So the biggest knock on Marco Rubio is that, I'm trying to say this nicely, I guess the polite thing would be he's got street smarts, not necessarily book smarts. Like, nobody looks at Marco Rubio as an intellectual powerhouse of the party. You know what I mean? So during the debate, Rubio delivers this line, and I'm sort of paraphrasing it here because I don't remember it exactly, but basically says that it's an attack on Obama. You know, Obama knows exactly what he's doing. He's tearing down America's moral foundation, blah, 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 blah. And he says this, and it's a line that he had apparently repeated a lot on the stump. And Chris Christie, who was still in the race at that point, was the next person to speak. And he said, you know, the problem with something like that is that it's just a campaign slogan. It's not real. We need real solutions. We need real thought, blah, 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 blah. And okay, fine. Minor little moment in the campaign. But then, a couple of minutes later, and I really do mean like 2 minutes later, Rubio had the chance to speak again and repeated the exact same line about Obama tearing down the foundation, exactly word for word, the same thing that he just said. And Christie was able to interrupt him and go, there, that is exactly what I'm talking about. You are just repeating this robotic line. And this is how the Rubio bot meme was born. And various protesters showed up at Marco Rubio campaign rallies, starting the next day in little cardboard outfits and little Rubio bot must be rebooted now. Control-Alt-Delete, Marco. Control-Alt-Delete. Poor Marco. So, as you look across this field of these mostly men, you start to realize why there were 17 candidates in the race. Because they mostly kind of started looking around and going, I can beat those guys, they're not all that impressive. Which, by the way, is basically what John Kasich did. I mean, Kasich was one of the last people to declare his candidacy for the primary. He did it shortly before Donald Trump did in 2015. And I'm pretty sure he did it because he looked at it and said, you know, I'm a governor of a big state. My record is better than most of these people, and I'm not an idiot. I'm pretty sure John Kasich is not an idiot. Why not me? Of course, what was the big problem with Kasich's candidacy? He wasn't far enough right. Exactly. He was the moderate in this race, and of all the labels to have, being the moderate was not the one you really wanted. Okay, so that brings us to Trump, and Donald Trump's out. So Donald Trump enters the race. Right away, he has better name recognition than anybody else in the field, and his own distinct personal brand, which nobody else in the field had. So, unsurprisingly, in a world where there's a list of 17 people and you can't pick them out of the lineup, a plurality, a relatively small plurality at the time, of Republican voters lined up behind Trump. So in 2015, he's running at about 20 to 25% in the polls. 75% of Republican voters still dislike him, or at least weren't going to vote for him. But he was the leader by virtue of name recognition. And meanwhile, all these other guys were jockeying against each other, and it was really, really hard for them to gain any traction and actually differentiate themselves. Because, you know, when it comes down to it,
How different is Marco Rubio from Ted Cruz? Or Jeb Bush, for that matter? What's the new policy idea that you have that your opponents don't have? Oh, nothing? It's basically the same? Great. So these guys were all splitting up the rest of the vote, while Trump was getting his 25%. And, just as a cherry on top, everybody else who was in the campaign had apparently read a lot of political science and knew all about the whole discovery, scrutiny, decline thing. And so they just assumed Trump was going to go away on his own. They thought, there's no way. You know, voters will turn on him when it turns out that he won't release his tax returns. Because obviously we're not going to elect a president who won't tell us something as basic as how much money do you have and how much money do you owe and who do you owe it to and who are you in business with. Or they thought, you know, Trump's incredibly long history of sex scandals, some of which were not consensual, that'll come back to haunt him. Or the overt racism, that'll definitely sink in. Or the fact that he has no idea what he's talking about, well, that'll definitely sink in. And so they didn't actually attack him, because it turns out that it's not enough for the media to point these things out. You, as the opponent, may actually want to take some time to criticize your opponent. But they didn't do that because they all wanted the Trump voters. So he basically skates through. And he's also helped out by the fact that in any public debate, it's going to be Donald Trump standing on a stage, excuse me, with 9 other guys. It's actually much easier to get through a debate if there are 10 of you. Because if there's something that you don't really understand or that you don't really want to talk about, it's really, really easy to just keep your mouth shut and let everybody else do the talking and let everybody else attack each other, which was basically Trump's strategy through the Republican primary debate. Oh yeah, the race thing. In a general election, being a racist will really hurt you because, you know, there are actual ethnic minorities who will, you know, not want to vote for somebody who's a white nationalist. But in a Republican primary, you have overwhelmingly white voters. Black voters, Latino voters, these just don't make up significant constituencies in the Republican primary. So you can say a lot of overtly racist things, and not the people that you're offending, well, it doesn't matter, because they're over in the Democratic primary voting over there. And that's how you get Trump. Here's a lesson that I'm going to repeat in this class often. Rules matter. Whether it's congressional districts, whether it's legislative rules, whether it's party rules, whatever. Rules always matter. And I know they're boring. Nobody wants to sit there and read the top of the box. You just want to start playing the game, for God's sake. But you know who wins? The person who read the top of the box. All right. Broadly speaking, there are 2 different kinds of contests that you can engage in. And each state is allowed to choose, remember, how they allocate their delegates. And so each state is responsible for deciding how it is that votes are going to be counted. Some states use what's called a caucus system. A party caucus is basically a meeting. So every single precinct within a state will have a meeting place, usually a school, a church, they'll rent a room someplace. It could be somebody's living room, for that matter. It doesn't matter. You have a meeting, and everybody who wants to be at the party caucus goes to the meeting, and you sit there and you discuss party business and party organization stuff, and motions are made, and you have to second and carry the motion and vote on them. It's a lot of Robert's Rules of Order stuff. Anybody do student Congress in high school? All right. I like to know I'm not the biggest nerd in the room. Anyway, eventually you vote. You select a delegate slate. That delegate slate does not go to the National Convention. That delegate slate then goes on to the state convention, and at the state convention, those delegates will select delegates to go on to the National Convention.